This notion of looking at things through a different perspective, we often think about that as a switch in our cognitive frame, in our thinking, but also we now know there's this parallel signal that's sent to the body in which, in order to access these alternate rule sets, new ways of looking at things, there's a calming signal literally sent to the body as well. And I find this conversation fascinating because normally we just think about anxiety and exploration and rule setting and rule responses or responses to rules, et cetera, as a kind of the body sends signals and the brain does all this, what neuroscientists have always talked about as top-down processing, right? Just sort of suppress the hypothalamus, control the limbic system.
Right.
And that's true to some extent, but there's also, it's clear there are signals being sent to the body in parallel. And rather than look at the signals...
It's more like conducting than suppressing.
Exactly.
Like conducting, like an orchestrator conducts.
Exactly. And there's a very interesting phenomenon that takes place in people that have chronic anxiety, or for people who essentially stop accessing alternate rules and responses to these signals. And this is, I think, what is showing up in chronic anxiety, certainly in certain forms of depression, and when people enter states of rage and dysregulation, is that normally we know, based on neuroimaging, that the prefrontal cortex is essentially leading the response of this anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. So information is coming up from the body into the insula and then being fed to the prefrontal cortex. But then the prefrontal cortex is actually in a position to lead responses, and it essentially is acting like the coach of a team. And the team is all these structures like the ACC and the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, the heart rate and so forth. What happens in individuals who have chronic anxiety or damage to the prefrontal cortex, you can't allow the autonomic response to overtake you, or you lose access to an enormous database that resides in one's hippocampus, and you essentially, one then defaults to the bodily state,